Welcome everybody to the Policy Committee meeting for February 28th, 2023. We'll start with a roll call. Mr. Epps?
Present.
Ms. Haywood's here. Mr. Diazio, two of the committee members are not here this evening.
So we can do the meeting and then the minutes will just reflect that two of the committee members were here and that we proceeded with the meeting and the members that were present recommended whatever actions are recommended.
Okay, great. And I want to recognize Ms. Walker and another board member who's present today. Okay. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of January 24th, 2023.
So moved.
Okay, I'll second.
I can't do anything.
You can second.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're going to go to new business, and these are all policies that we reviewed at the last policy committee meeting. They're coming back to the policy committee meeting this evening for a second review, starting with policy 113, special education. Ms. Jackson?
I'm about 2 minutes away from being able to project. And I can then put the policies up on the screen, but if there's any discussion that we want to have since the materials are circulating, right? We certainly can do that. Or-
I don't think there were any changes
No,
to,
not to 113.
yeah, there were not any changes to policy 113 since the last policy committee.
Any board comment regarding policy 113, which is titled special education? Any comments from administration on 113? Okay. I can't see if there's anybody in the waiting.
Yes, there are other participants. Let me see.
Okay, any comments from the public on policy 113 on special education? Nothing?
No,
Okay.
I don't
all
see
right.
any hands up.
No, you don't. Okay. Alrighty, seeing no comments, we're going to move this to adoption at the next board meeting, which will be on March the 14th, 2023. Next on the agenda is policy 113.1, screening and evaluations for students with disabilities. Any board comment on 113.1?
And there were no changes to this policy either since last month.
Okay.
No, there weren't any changes, just the order was changed. Between 113.1 and 113.3, the order just switched.
Okay.
That was it.
All righty. Any comments from administration or the board on 113.1? Okay. Ms. Jackson, any hands up in the?
No. No, no, there are no hands up from our participants.
Okay. So policy 113.1 will also go forward for board adoption on March the 14th. Next on the agenda is policy 113.2, behavior support. Ms. Jackson, Mr. Diazio?
113.2, no changes to this one since the last meeting.
No, 113.2.
Showing that the last
Oh, okay.
Okay.
modification was, when was the last meeting? January 20?
24.
Oh, so there, okay, so this was the
It
policy.
was the policy that
we
we
did modify.
updated. Mhm.
And what we did here, and I know we'll probably have discussion, was with the seclusion language, this was modified to make this much more narrow in terms of when seclusion would be an option. I know that maybe the committee wants to discuss removing the paragraph in its entirety. I don't know if Mr. Evans has any feedback. From my standpoint, it's fine one way or the other. You know,
So I will throw that out to the committee. Any questions or comments by the board members regarding policy 113.2, with the understanding that this has been updated to more narrowly define when exclusion would be applicable. We do know that we have received specific comments from a board member requesting removal of seclusion, particularly if it's not legally required, particularly in terms of the concern about students with disabilities being secluded. Any board discussion?
Can I just quickly ask a question? I was not here last meeting for the full discussion on this curriculum policy, but I did hear Ms. Bowman's comments. And I know one of the questions was there anything that we were required to have in our policy regarding seclusion? And it sounds, Mr. Diaz, like you're saying there is not an authority that is requiring us to have
Correct.
that policy.
correct. And the language, I understand last month was, not that it was more permissive, but the language that's currently in there clarifies that seclusion would only be an option when there's imminent and immediate threat of injury, and seclusion is the least restrictive alternative, and only for a minimum amount of time, and in a room that's supervised. Not necessarily someone in the room, but usually someone standing at the door for a child who's experiencing some issues. And I don't know, Mr. Evans, if you can speak to any situations or scenarios where seclusion might be utilized, but it's very, very, very rare.
Yeah, the one of the comments I'd have, and I'm just coming in new here. I honestly don't like the term seclusion. That's a de-escalation or a calming room. I don't know why we're using the term seclusion. I don't know whether that's something that we have to use. I'd rather call it for what it's worth, what we use it for. I think the policy is okay. It's used in rare occasions when there's a student is a threat to harm themselves or others. That's the only comment I have right now. Is I'm not comfortable with the seclusion because it's more of a de-escalation or calming room.
So I just have a question kind of follow up to what you just asked, Ms. Mulhern. Would de-escalation or de-escalation room that you refer to, would that be an aversive technique under the definition in the policy itself?
Not in my knowledge. It's not. De-escalation is basically trying to help somebody to overcome some of the behaviors that are either threatening to hurt themselves or others. There's nothing aversive about it. It's more basically a calming time where we can kind of reduce the situation in which a student may hurt themselves or in a situation where somebody else might get hurt. We're just trying to have them calm down. And there's nothing, we don't do anything in there as adversive. There's always somebody in that room, and the room is basically designed to try to help them to calm down.
So that seclusion paragraph reads with or without staff supervision in the same room at all times. But I'm hearing Mr. Evans say that there is staff present I think you said in the room?
Yes.
It's not.
Oh, you did not.
Mr. Evans, you said in or outside?
You did say in or outside.
To clarify, what I'm saying is when there's we use the calming or de-escalation room, there's always a staff member with that person, with that student.
But does with mean in the room or observing the room? I guess that's my question.
My understanding is it's in the room, not left alone.
And that is, again, overwhelming majority of scenarios, that is the case.
Yes.
I've heard of instances where a child that has a lot of energy to get out, or is having some sort of meltdown and needs some space, where a staff member would stand at the door, but on the other side of the door. while the student would be in generally a room that doesn't have a lot of furniture in it or anything like that, and would allow that student some space to get out whatever energy they need to get out. And then once the student has calmed down, go back in. It's not a locked room. It's not unsupervised. It's a room where there's immediate supervision.
And eyes on the student at all times.
So I don't know if we would be more comfortable, but I'm thinking, and this, I don't know, seclusion or de-escalation room. Actually, I guess under the law, there's no specified term or definition. So I'm just throwing out for us to consider, do we want to say, or ask, administration would be appropriate to say, with staff supervision in the same room at all times when appropriate for safety, something like that. Because I think our concern, at least what I'm hearing, is that if there's staff supervision, the preference would have the staff in the room with the student, if it's safe to do so.
I don't know how that really reads any differently.
Well, it basically says with staff supervision in the same room at all times, if appropriate, which means it leaves open for non-staff supervision to be in the room. But I just want to be clear that either with staff supervision in the room, that would be the preference. If it's a issue in terms of, you know, danger to that staff member being in the room, the child, then, you know, they would be observing the child from a safe distance, but the preference would be that an adult would be with the student.
So would the last sentence be modified to say, district staff shall provide continuous supervision, students in seclusion, which involves the presence of staff within the same room unless a threat to the safety, as opposed to leaving it as it's written now, which sort of indicates that it could go either way.
Right.
I see what you're saying.
Mhm.
That would be I think I could rewrite that last sentence, if that was the direction the committee wanted to go in.
Yes, it's, I think, because I just want to make sure that the key is supervision. The key is having eyes on the student at all times. Yes, there may be the rarest situations where we don't, that we want to be not in close proximity to that student, but never leave them alone and always have eyes on them in that situation. So I think if we can reword that, it would be helpful.
Okay, that would, Mr. Diazio, if you could propose language, I mean, obviously, maybe not tonight, unless you have it.
I'm working on it here.
Okay.
District staff shall provide continuous supervision of students in seclusion, which shall involve the presence of staff within the same room, unless such presence is determined to be an immediate threat to
The student or staff.
the student or staff member.
Yeah.
There's already a requirement that it needs to be supervised.
Right.
I am so sorry. What you have up there, Mr. Diazio, is not what I see attached to the agenda or the PrEP policy.
Yes, so there was a little bit of, I think, so the very first policy looks
Okay.
like it's the behavior support policy. In fact, it's the. third
I have to
section.
really scroll down. All right,
Yeah,
there we go.
yeah.
I'm good.
I did the same thing earlier.
Wait a second, I missed something major, but now I'm good. Thank you.
So is the board comfortable with this revised language?
I appreciate the real-time work that we can see.
We're just doing this.
Yeah,
We can undo it just as fast as we did.
Yeah, and I know, Miss Loman isn't here tonight, to speak on her own behalf, but based upon what we just heard, that in practice, de-escalation techniques are used, and in practice, it's not seclusion as it's defined, then we remove like the use of seclusion and speak to de-escalation techniques. It's done under supervision of staff. It's not going to exceed any time that is beyond like something identified in someone's IP. And then given that we know there's an AR coming, that can speak to like specific types of de-escalation techniques that will, be used or so forth, but the policy itself sort of just stays broader at that de-escalation techniques are used. If technically we're not even doing seclusion and there's no legal consequence that not having it.
So we would really then change or delete seclusion and say de-escalation room.
Right.
And maybe say in extraordinary circumstances only. Administration will use de-escalation techniques, including involuntary confinement, blah, 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 to continue with the same definition.
Correct.
The one caveat to that is de-escalation strategies are very common. So placing a student in a room, what's contemplated here as seclusion, that's one form of de-escalation, but there are many different types of de-escalation strategies that are used every day. Sometimes it's staff change the way they talk to a child, or they provide, an opportunity to have a trusted adult that they can go and talk to when they're feeling emotional. Like many of those strategies are de-escalation strategies. So we'll just have to tweak the language, because what we don't want a policy to say is that we only use de-escalation strategies in rare circumstances, because de-escalation strategies are very common. It's just the degree to which you implement them.
Is it a way to add de-escalation along with seclusion? So de-escalation via seclusion, or by means of seclusion,
Sure.
because this point is a valid point with respect to the breadth of which de-escalation, it's a wide breadth.
There's a lot.
And
Right, and
we-
this is
and we wanted to be.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so are
So-
we?
So maybe what we would do is, maybe we'll take this, based on this discussion, maybe we could take this policy back, make some edits to it, and we'll bring it back next month
As a repeat first
as a
reading?
repeat first reading, as opposed to sending it for adoption.
Yeah, I would agree.
I agree. And if I might add, there's a technical piece to what we are talking about, like the words and how it describes it. I think Dr. Scriven put it well in the Educational Affairs Committee meeting, where there's some scars and there's some experiences that folks are going to interpret seclusion in a way that, we might not want them to interpret it.
Right.
So in this opportunity, we have an opportunity to kind of think creatively about how we describe it as a way of pushing forward beyond, what might be some of those scars.
I think to Ms. Ebb's point, we may want to give a little clarity around the de-escalation or calm down room versus the sensory room, because they're two very different experiences, right? But to provide context, which was a missed opportunity in the ed affairs, would be good. And we could potentially do that here.
Great.
Yeah, and I think it's important to narrow the opportunity to use this kind of extreme circumstance. And I think we need to be clear that's in an unlocked room. I mean, if we're going to proceed with this as an option for administration, if you believe that may be needed under certain circumstances. I would like to have us, definitely come back with some of those changes in mind.
So if we can work with Mr. Evans, I think under definitions,
Yep.
we need to add sensory room, what that means, de-escalation or calm down room, what that means. So then when individuals see that reflected in the content of the policy, they have a point of reference in terms of understanding the what that entails.
Okay.
And with the calm down room, from your perspective, from Ms. Loma's perspective, take the place of the word seclusion.
I think that it would just add context to the word seclusion. I think it's hard to remove seclusion in entirety because it is a reality. I'm not gonna, it is a current practice, so I'm not gonna sit here and say that it's not.
And what do we want to hamstring you from using, you know, a technique that you think is effective? But we want to make sure it's not harmful.
Yeah, I think that we just need to be more explicit around what it entails as a
Okay.
There's also some guidance out there from the Office for Civil Rights that gives guidance to school districts about how to implement seclusion when absolutely necessary in a non-discriminatory way. So we can look at the most recent iteration of that guidance and try to incorporate, if it's not already in here, some of those themes.
Thank you. Any other board comments? Any comments from the community?
Don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for those comments and discussion. Next, under new business is 113.3, discipline of students with disabilities.
Do we want to note, Madam Chair, that 113.2 will come back as a second?
Yes, it'll come back to the policy committee next up as a repeat first read. Taking into consideration all the comments that were made today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so next is policy 113.3, discipline of students with disabilities. It's a new policy.
And this policy goes well or is intended to interface with policy 218, which the board spent a lot of time with a few years back. That's the general student discipline policy for the district. There was some language lifted from 218 and also policy 829, which is the equity policy, to make sure that those things made their way into 113.3. These templates for special education policies were largely taken from PSBA. And the reason for that is because PSBA documents incorporate a lot of the findings that the auditors who audit special education programming have made statewide. And so they're good templates, but I just want the committee to know they were customized with an eye towards Cheltenham's local practices in terms of its approach to discipline and emphasis on equity and looking at discipline with an equity lens.
Thank you. Were there any material changes made to 113.3 since last time it was presented to the board? Let's see.
No.
Any board comments on 113.3?
No suggestion for a substantive change. Just in reading this, just give I don't know if anyone's listening, but just for the official record, just honoring and lifting up our staff. This is not an easy task, especially as you talk about like what's something that manifests from behavior that manifests from someone's diagnosis or not, and the various pathways that you take, right, to de-escalate to care for one's safety. And so just wanted to honor them in this moment, because this is no easy task, and they're in schools every day, and it's unknown what they may encounter. And so they have to do that with patience, care, and we have a lot of trust that they do that every day. So wanted to look that up as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other board comments for 113.2? Okay, so this policy will go forward for board approval at the March legislative meeting. Mr. Diaz, just a quick question. Oh, I'll come right out to you guys. I did not see any, I saw the legal references. Oh, I see the cross references now. At the very end. 829 and 218. Yeah. Great, thank you.
Yep.
Yes, I'm going to go out to the public to see if there are any questions about 113.3.
Yes,
Sir, did you have a question or a comment?
Gerville Brown, Elkins Park.
Welcome.
I do have a son, so he's deaf and he's autism spectrum, which hence when I hear discipline of student with disabilities, my ear, sort of pops up. I'm assuming though that I've not read the entire policy, assuming that you have specific like classes of disability that students are in. It's not just student with any disabilities across the board.
I'm going to defer to administration to answer that question. So the question was, is the discipline policy for students with disabilities across the board for any disability, or is it evaluated based on the student's particular disability?
Sure. I'll take a first crack at that, and then if admin wants to add anything. So the district's approach to discipline is one, that is based on positive reinforcement and the utilization of restorative practices as opposed to punitive discipline. Punitive discipline would mean suspensions or expulsions, things like that. The district tries whenever possible to model positive behavior and to encourage positive behavior to try to impact good behavior in students. Whenever a student with a disability is going to be removed from school as a result of behavior, they have certain protections under federal law. This policy talks about the protections that those students have. So if you have a student that has a disability and they commit an offense in school or an infraction of the school rules, and let's say that infraction would otherwise have them be suspended for a lengthy period of time. One of the things that the district is required to do for a student with a disability is to look at why that situation happened. Was it just because there was a disciplinary incident, or was it a result of the student's disability? And if the behavior was a result of a disability, then there's a different process that we have to follow to protect that student's rights. So this policy is really about protections that are available and afforded to students with disabilities when there are disciplinary infractions. Did that help answer some of your questions?
I mean, it gave me a good overview, but I like to be specific in terms of, like, one of the things I personally came across is that my son plays sports, football per se, and I make sure that, well, he tries to streamline himself. So if you ask him if he's deaf, he's not going to answer. He's going to turn his good ear towards you, keep talking. For me, whenever I fill out any form, all the sports form, I said deaf in right ear, autism spectrum, PDD, autism spectrum. He's highly functioning. Mm-hmm. But after he was playing sports probably about 5-6 years, we finally found out that speaking with his coach, I mean, I don't speak to the coach myself, so it's in terms of saying my son is disabled, so give him preferential treatment. I stay away from that. But what I found out is that we had a discussion with the coach, and I came out and said, my son is deaf. And he looked at me and said, oh my God, he didn't know. He's saying all this time I'm yelling at your son saying, cut right. He's telling him the strategy for the team. And when he's talking to him, he's saying, all right, this is the strategy we're gonna play. Cut to the right. And my son is, either go to the left or he's just, staring instead of saying, coach, I didn't hear you. you know, and I realized that I'm filling out the forms, which I'm assuming that everyone who was involved with my son is aware of what's on the form, regardless of what my son tells you or not. And it comes to mind that nobody was aware that, you know, and if you're coaching my son and he has a disability, that's something that everyone should be aware of at every level. You know, like I said, it's not a matter of to gain preferential treatment, but I want that when you're dealing with them, you're aware. And if you don't mentor kids, you know, to me that was a big gap in, you know, in communication. Because like I said, I'm every form I filled out, I write in bold caps, whatever was handwritten. And, you know, or I said, my son is deaf in his right ear. He's on the autism spectrum. So if he's out there in the field and you see him start dancing around, you know that, you know, that's part of his autism, you know, condition. So it got to my core when I found out that the coach was, you know, coaching him all the time, didn't know that, you know. And my son, like I said, when I yelled at him and said, "What are you doing? Why are you doing what we tell you?" You know, he is a personality where he would just smile. But to me, like I said, that's already done. But personally, I want to make sure it's fixed for everyone else. So there should be a communication where a kid has a disability. It shouldn't be where it's going to be hidden or what they call it, PII information not being shared with someone. So to me, everyone who touches or comes close to that kid should be aware of his condition, especially in the school capacity. You know, so like I said, that's something you know, whenever I see a disability, or I'm trying to advocate for my son now because I'm Jamaican in my upbringing, and I have to admit, when I was growing up in Jamaica, the school took care of the kids. Their parents, a lot of them lacked the education to know what was going on. But when they go to the school, the teachers and the administration took control of that kid. And so as a Jamaican in my aspect, I tend to sit back and say, if I'm sending him to school, once he gets to school, I know that he's taken care of in all aspects. So when I found out that wasn't, you know, there was a loophole in there, it got to me. So when you see me start showing up here and voicing my opinion, I can't change the past for him, but I want to make sure it's, you know, it's fixed for other kids moving forward. But especially, you know, like I said, if I fill out a form, I'm assuming everyone should, you know, should be aware of it. And I'm sorry, you're talking about discipline. When I heard discipline, I'm picturing someone walk to see my son, you know, get in a little trouble, whatever. Somebody grabbed him and said, you know, hey, okay, now you're in isolation. Which, I mean, you clarify that for me. You have to have a broad policy because you're dealing with kids with different levels of, you know, disability.
Correct.
I'm fortunate that my son is highly functioning, but I'm aware there's some kids where, you know, there's actually, you know, I would deem behavior could be problematic or dangerous in a sense. So I do understand where your policy goes. You just said I had to come and clarify for myself to make sure that you're not saying every kid with a disability, every time you do something, get in trouble, this is how we're going to teach you.
Yeah, I just want to thank you very much for your comments. Very much appreciate that. I'm going to give Dr. Scriven an opportunity to respond as well if you'd like to. But I just wanted to also give you some context for our overarching kind of umbrella discipline policy, which is policy 218, which has been, as Mr. DiMarzio said, drastically revised over the last several years to really have a focus on positive behavior support for all of our students. The policy that we're talking about right now is specific policy for students with disabilities. So when a student who has a disability and there may be some infraction, we also want to make sure that that infraction is not as a manifestation of their disability. If it is, that's all taken into consideration in the context of what might have occurred. So I wanted to say that's why we have a separate policy. It's not separate in the sense that we are targeting or focusing on students with disabilities, but we are also legally required to make sure that if there is an infraction of our student code or otherwise, that student, if that behavior is a manifestation of their disability, then that is all taken into consideration in terms of consequences.
And I will follow up on your other points. Those are good points. I'm an ex-coach. I used to know my students in terms of if they were on IEPs or what their accommodations were. I can't say 100% at this point that that's happening now, but I'll find out. And I thank you for bringing that up. It makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, sir.
So I'll follow up.
Thank you very much. Any other comments regarding policy 113.3?
There are no hands up.
Okay, all right. Then we move on to new business, policy 011, principles for governance and leadership.
So policy 011 is principles for governance and leadership. The board actually just revised this last year, but as you probably know through some updates through PSBA, there was a statewide committee that was convened to look at these principles earlier this year. And the revisions that you're seeing to 011 are the changes that that group came up with. I will point out that there is one component of this policy. It's under govern effectively. You'll see the second bullet point here. The board tweaked this bullet point a little bit the last time, and it does refer to looking at policy from an equity perspective consistent with the equity policy. Equity did not make its way into the statewide principles, but I do just want to point out for the committee and the board and the public, that has been something that this board has deemed to be imperative to put in this policy, and it remains.
I did notice that, and I was glad to see that, and I definitely appreciate that because I think this board is not think we are committed to equity, and that was very important for us to have that in this policy itself. And again, the PSBA did look at this overarching policy. They did not include any reference to equity. So, any board comments regarding 011? The only thing that I would add is, for lead responsibly, I would probably put in the second bullet, work together with civility, respect, and cooperation. Just as an addition.
So say that one more time, please, Ms. Taylor.
Yes, work together with civility, respect, and cooperation.
Okay.
Any other board comments? Okay, any community comments regarding policy 01?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Alrighty, this will go forward for first read. And this is really an overarching policy for the board in terms of our governance principles. Next on the agenda is policy in AR 820, district-wide safety. And Ms. Jackson, I'll turn that over to you.
District-wide 828 policy and AR. When discussing this with Ed, there's some minor revisions that are needed for, what was it, safety training requirements, I believe in.
Yes, so you'll see here in the professional development, school safety and security section, Act 55 of 2022, when that legislation was adopted last year, there were some changes to the annual training that staff need to go through, mainly with respect to threatening behavior, signs of threatening behavior in students. So there was also clarification about which trainings could be done, for example, on Zoom or on an internet platform versus those that needed to take place in person. And that's just all spelled out in the school code now. So we've revised this policy to reflect those new training requirements.
Okay. Okay, and Mr. Diazio, are those in the AR?
Yes.
Yes.
So I don't believe that the policy here changed.
I don't see any red
You know,
lines.
I do recall some of the reason it's listed is because some of the cross references were cleaned up, but you won't see any redlining in the document itself.
Okay, any board comments to policy AR 828? You know what? Okay. Active versus the draft. Okay. I had a couple of questions regarding the training. So for the the AR itself, when we have, let's see, where is it? Just a general question regarding coordinating training resources. And it kind of outlines what kind of training, has to be completed. Is that annually?
So there is some annual training that is required to take place. And it's 2 hours of training. So there is a requirement. So there are some employees who have requirements every 5 years to complete a certain minimum number of hours of required training. However, you'll see here, 1 hour of training shall be completed each year in these two categories. So the items 1 and 2 that are listed under the 1 hour of training, those trainings need to take place annually. The other categories of training, you don't have to have each one every year, but you have to have 2 hours within the topics on that list. So I think, Mrs. Saywood, to answer your question, there is annual training, but not every topic has to be trained on every year.
And then with respect to the building level emergency plans, it has in the second paragraph reference to age appropriate safety posters being displayed throughout each school building. Are those so they're in every school building? Do we know where those are kind of generally posted for students?
Those can be, many times those are the evacuation routes, or I've seen them just in different school buildings that I'm in. Sometimes they're in the restrooms, like on the back of the door in the restrooms, or sometimes when you enter, like if there's multiple sets of doors that you enter when you go into a school, sometimes they're posted there. But generally those are the signs that you would see that talk about what to do in an emergency and how to get out of the building if you need to.
And a lot of times they are created from the state and given out statewide, and we put out to our district based on upgrades to policy and practice.
And I guess some are pictorial and some are.
But it would be good for, and I can arrange this, we can talk offline about it, but it would be good for John White to come in and probably give the board, maybe at our next retreat, an update around the safety protocols and the upgrades, because there have been upgrades this year.
Okay, that would be great. I have a couple more questions.
I'm here.
Sorry. And the school safety officers, I know in the past we had some conversation about the number and the role of the school safety officers. Do we know how many school safety officers we have right now?
So at the high school, there are 6. At Cedarbrook, I believe there's just 2 right now. At the elementary, there's 1. And then we have 1 that comes in later, that is kind of like the floater, like Mark, that you guys see at the, when we have meetings like this, he's here now,
Right.
I'm pretty sure. So he covers the back end of the day from like 2 to 10. 6. 10 to 12 safety numbers.
Clarify, when you said, I'm sorry, when you said elementary, school, I know EP has one, the four, the K through 14, okay, I just wanted to, for myself and everyone.
Are we considering reducing the number of safety officers at the high school?
Not correct.
Can we think about it over time? And the reason why I raise that is that we know that we had safety officers in place as a result of a major event that occurred.
Right.
At the time, there was a need to have that presence. And I think the board had some concerns about retaining that presence at the high school. If we could transition away from that and have our teachers, have more of a, not, well, that's another matter, but anyway, so that was kind of the thinking of the board trying to reduce the number.
So we're not there yet. We may not be there prior to your transition, but I have no number. So I'll update you when we get there.
Okay.
And it's the record, that's something that we can discuss.
Thank you.
Yes,
Tyler.
yes, yes.
And then just an observation. So we have the role of students in promoting school safety, security, and climate research and learning. Just that part of it. There is a sixth bullet where we have create, join, or support student organizations which combat violence, teach tolerance, and understanding of promote a positive self-image. I'd like to propose that we change teach tolerance to acceptance of others. Like teach acceptance of others as opposed to teach tolerance.
Like that.
And then my last question is with respect to the lockdowns. We know, based on the world that we live in right now, that we have to have the lockdown drills times a year. And just wanted to know, just generally, if we have any sense of how the students are going to feel after these drills, and then if there's anything that we provide in terms of counseling to help them get through that, because it's sure a little scary. It would be scary to me.
Yes, that's a great question. I know for sure, especially at the elementary level, that the active shooter drill is the one that brings anxiety more so than any of these other drills. But that could be something that we unpack further. I'm not looked into that, but can definitely investigate and try to get some student voice, especially at that K through 4, 5, 6, to see how students feel about that.
And any support they need.
I think in addition to the students, because I think for some of them, it probably is upsetting, is that I think it's hard for the teachers too at that age and the staff, because they're, going through a drill that they understand in a different way and having to explain it. And I think it can get very emotional for everyone, I think.
But it's something that has to be done.
Yeah,
So,
unfortunately.
One suggestion that I might have, and Dr. Scriven, as this being your first full year, one of the things that the board can look for before the end of June, Mr. White, as the safety and security coordinator, will be doing an executive session with the board as part of his role as the safety and security coordinator to talk about the district's current safety and security practices and strategies to improve school safety. Maybe one of the things that we could try to do is circulate or solicit feedback from the board in advance of that session about questions you may have. And then Mr. White could come to that session. The second to the last bullet point here that you see on the screen, this is the requirement for the annual executive session. So anything that might be of interest, we could begin to line that up for that presentation. That can take place anytime in the spring.
It's a great idea. And just for the public, that report is presented in an executive session. a couple of years ago, the legislature adopted rules that basically allows the board to have reports that really need to remain private as relates to security, and adding that to the list of executive session topics. So just wanted to point that out to the public. Any other comments to policy in AR 828, district-wide safety? Any community comments?
No, there are no comments, no questions, no raised hands.
Okay, thank you. Then moving, so that will be posted as the first read at our next legislative meeting on Wednesday. Next is policy in AR 7 building security. That's being proposed for repeal. I'm assuming
Correct.
that's because of policy in AR 828.
Yes, so when the board adopted the comprehensive safety policy a couple of years back, there were a number of policies that got repealed. There was a maintenance policy, there was an emergency evacuation of buses policy. There was a policy on, there were many different safety policies that existed. For some reason, 709 never got repealed. But we noticed it during this school year as we were looking at the old policies. So I did take a look at 709, both the policy and the AR, and all of the topics that were included in 709 are already contemplated one way or the other in the safety policy. So there was nothing that actually needed to move over. But nothing's being deleted from our safety practices. It's just already in policy.
Great. Any board comments about the proposed repeal of policy in AR 7 and 9? Any community comments regarding policy in AR 7 and 9?
No.
So this will also be first read policy at the March 14th meeting. Next on the agenda is policy in AR 236, threat assessment. I'll turn this over to administration.
This policy was also there were some minor changes or updates for training requirements.
Yes, so this was also an Act 55 update in 2022. The law clarified that the training of the threat assessment team is annual training. So you'll see a couple references. These are in the AR to the fact that the training is annually. And then there was a provision that was added to this policy, which you saw a few moments ago in the district-wide safety policy that talks about threat assessment training.
Any board comments to policy in AR 236?
Overall, very minor changes here. The board may recall, this policy was new in 2021.
The only question I had was, do we, Dr. Scriven, and I didn't have a chance to look at this before I came to the meeting, do we have a section of our website that's dedicated to safety, like the Safe to Safe program?
Yes.
Safe to say, definitely. I'm checking now, but
And the threat
in terms
assessment
of,
team?
in terms of a safety,
Under families, there's a safety tab.
There's a whole, once I find it, probably right here, here it is.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
If
Yeah,
you go
chance to go there.
families across the top, and then one of the items
Yeah,
listed is
safety.
safety.
Safety, perfect.
And you'll see, when we adopted the district-wide safety policy a couple years ago, this content on the website was also updated, which sometimes is not a perfect, sometimes when you update a policy, the old language exists in other places. We were very deliberate with the safety language at the time that we all needed to be speaking the same language and have consistent messaging. So this content is consistent with the district-wide safety policy.
and the infographic to the right is an example of something that you would see displayed within schools. So it's just an example. And that was something that was created at the state level, but we modified to represent our district.
And do we then put on the front page when we have, I don't know what safety month is or anything, do we kind of push that out? It's great to have all that information in one place on our website.
I don't know per se if there's a safety month or anything from that standpoint.
No, from time to time, I know there'll be a push and reminder, safe to say, for families and students, which kind of pop up on social media. But that's not a safety month per se, but just
Oh,
a
yeah, I know,
reminder.
there is a
Yeah, I
safety
know.
month.
There's fire safety month around them, but, and those posters I see and little signs all over our buildings, for older kids.
Safe to say is huge.
Yeah.
For our district. It really is. I just haven't been there.
Yeah, that's just an easy for the kid child.
Yeah. And the only other thing that I would add to the Safe Schools incident reporting, which I think is in the AR. Policy. No, it's in the AR. I think we have reference to recording use or sale of alcohol or tobacco. And I would just add vaping products as well, just consistent with our updated policy. Oh, and then the other question I had was with respect to Safe Schools incident reporting. We have a reference to
To that point on the Safe Schools reporting, I don't know that vaping violations get reported on that form. So if I could check that, and if that, I'll include it here, but I'll just check on that before the board meeting, before this moves forward. And whatever gets reported on that form, we'll make sure that that's what the AR says, if the committee's okay with that.
Great. I found it now. So I can go back. In that second paragraph under Safe Schools incident reporting, we talk about reporting required incidents. And then reporting, having the discretion to report, or may report discretionary incidents to the police under our MOU. I think because we did modify our MOU last year,
Yes.
where discretionary reporting, we took off of the table. So I would like to strike that language and just report the required reports for incidents to the police as required by the code. Any other board comments? I'm just gonna be okay with
I'm very fine. That's whenever I'm quiet, you know I'm good.
that. Just checking.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we'll just, Mr. Diazio, just delete the language as it relates to the report, follow that through.
Property.
Yeah.
Right.
So I may report up to property. And may report. And I think that was it on. Yeah, that was all that I had for this one. Any other board comments on policy AR 236? Any community comments?
No, there's no community comments.
Okay, so this will go forward for first read.
So I have a question. So there are not any changes necessarily in the policy, it's just the AR.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
just the AR.
So does this have to go for first read? Or
We
can we just share the AR?
It could be moved forward just so that it gets a revised date on it, because the committee did look at it. There's been a focus to look at policies like every 5 years, so it's been over a year, I think, since we've looked at this one. So it could move forward to get a new date, but there's no changes.
Okay. That's fine. So we'll include it as a first read and share the AR.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda is policy 827, conflict of interest. I'll turn this over to administration.
And this was one of our, it's nice to say 2016 was one of our older policies.
It's nice to say that, right?
Yeah. So Ed did some cleanup.
Yeah, so this is actually, it appears to be all new language, but nothing has really changed with this policy. The prior policy, for whatever reason, it was pasted in here as an image as opposed to a text file, so it couldn't be modified. So we deleted it, and you're seeing the same content essentially in text form. The law has not changed on conflict of interest. And the sole reason we're looking at this is because it is now one of the oldest policies on the books.
And board comments regarding policy 827. And it's nice to say that this is considered to be an old policy, considering that we had at one point the policies that went back to 2001. Or probably older
The
than that.
1980s.
Right. So there's been a massive cleanup, so I really want to thank
Give yourself more
Yeah.
credit, Mrs. Hayward.
and Ms. Jackson for bringing all of those policies forward. So now we're starting the cycle again. Okay. Mr. Diazio, just a quick question, a couple of questions. Does the annual statement of financial interest that we all file as board members, is that kind of tantamount to the conflict of interest form? Because we don't actually submit a conflict of interest form to the district.
The form that you complete by, I think it's April 1st, that is the form that's required under the Pennsylvania Ethics Act.
Right, and that, since we don't have a separate conflict of interest form, I'm assuming that that really takes the place of that requirement. It's not really a legal requirement, but I know I've signed conflict of interest forms with all employers before,
Yes,
but as a board member.
correct.
Yeah.
You're correct.
And then in terms of organizational conflicts, I know that we have procedurally, if there is a potential conflict, that the superintendent would first review that. And there's not, in another section with respect to reporting, also if an incident would be reported to the board president, if there was a conflict of any by an employee or third party. Well, no, that would actually be the superintendent and then also report to the board president. In both of those instances, would it be appropriate to include the solicitor as kind of the third party to review that conflict?
Am I looking in the right section?
Yeah, so under organizational conflicts, the
Yep.
second paragraph. So if there's a potential organizational conflict, it'll be reviewed by the superintendent or designee. And then under reporting, it would, the first paragraph, any suspected conflict detected or suspected by an employee or third party shall be reported to the superintendent. If there's a perceived conflict, the superintendent will also report the incident to the board president.
So maybe we could add that the potential conflict shall be reviewed by the superintendent or designee in consultation with the solicitor
Yes, that would be, that makes sense.
to determine. And then you said there was a second instance in reporting.
I mean, that way it also provides that additional support should those conflicts come to the superintendent or the president. They don't have to necessarily resolve them by themselves, although they could. But any other board comments on policy 827?
Julie, I would just like to add, I have no conflict of interest for the sake of this policy.
I'm glad you cleared that up because I was wondering. Thank you, Ms. Henry. Any community comments?
No, there, no questions, no hands raised.
Okay, so this will go also forward as the first read. And the next on the agenda is policy in AR 825, reporting waste and wrongdoing in district operations.
This needed format cleaning, format updating, just like the previous policy.
Yes, this one. What number?
P25.
In 825.
825. Yes, so again, no, this was a 2015 policy, so we actually paired these together, 825 and 827, reporting of waste and wrongdoing, conflict of interest, they sort of went together conceptually, 2015, 2016, two of the older policies, but you're not seeing any substantive changes to the policy itself.
Okay. Any board comments regarding policy in AR 825? Seeing none, any community comments?
No,
This will go forward for first read. And last on the agenda is policy 920, non-school organizations /groups/individuals.
So this was also a policy that the board just looked at in 2020. And based on some recommendations from PSBA, they wanted to replace the words distribute or post with the word disseminate, because presumably information can be communicated more than just posting it or distributing it in the technological world, I suppose, that we live in. So you see all of that terminology updated. You'll see a new definition for dissemination and removal of the definitions for distribution and posting. Those are really the main changes there. There were some other, minor wordsmithing, but that was the major change.
Okay. Thank you. Any board comments regarding policy 920? The only basic question I have is, how do we define non-school organizations?
So they're defined here. So let's take a look.
I know it's a defined term, but my question is, practically speaking, I'm just wondering from our perspective, what organizations would fit into that category? Like, for example, would the Cheltenham Foundation or Cheltenham African Alliance or CEEP or CAN be non-school organizations? Because they're supported by the school.
So I think that at least some of those entities would be considered part of the school program. Usually when I see requests for non-school organizations, they are community groups. They could be the Cheltenham Little League. They could be a local Rotary Club. It could be a local Boy Scout or Girl Scout organization. Those are the types of groups that usually will make requests to communicate information. I don't want to put Dr. Smith on the spot here, but I know that sometimes these requests do come to her office. I don't know if there's been any recent examples that might exist, or if the examples that I gave are the types that we're used to seeing. But the examples that I gave are most commonly what I've seen in my practice.
And I guess my question for Dr. Scriven is, do we want to at least maybe put some examples of those? Because I was confused in terms of what we would consider as a non-school organization. So the ones that you referenced make perfect sense,
Sure.
and I'm wondering whether somebody would think like SEEK or KNET or CAAA or non-school groups.
So they would be classified as school groups from our perspective.
Well, we'd have to look and see how we've done that historically. I think you could make an argument either way, and maybe we have to think about how we have done that in the past. Make sure we're consistent.
So let's see that,
Consistency is,
let's seek that clarity. Because we do support them, I even
Oh,
support them
absolutely.
financially, so there is a connection.
Yeah.
So we can look into that. I think this one may have to go on hold for a first read until we get that clarity, unless we can get it prior.
Yeah, and the only reason I raise that is because it also raises if you're a non-school organization, you want to utilize our facilities, there's obviously implications there, posting on our website, things like that. So, it'd be great if obviously we've been treating SEEK and CAN and CAAA
I mean,
and.
even when we look at our PTOs, they're not governed by.
and I imagine then as I think through it, they don't have the ability to independently post or distribute information, right?
No,
Disseminate. So my sense is, my guess, and we'll confirm this, but maybe we are treating them as non-school organizations, and that there's good reason why that's the case, because we don't govern that. They are their own groups. They're related
yeah.
in
I think
terms of their
that
mission.
They're partners, but they're not. It's a good point.
Okay, all right, we can take a look at that.
Because we have no governing.
So if
power
we
over
anticipate that the only changes would be adding examples if we're comfortable with the content, I think when we come back next month, adding examples would not be a substantive change. So it could move forward to first reading. We could get some additional information and add examples next month.
of the meeting.
I don't know.
Okay. Are you saying we should go?
I know,
It
right?
says my screen is paused.
Our
So
Zoom
we'll-
person,
Yes, I think we'll just go forward with this as first read,
Sure.
with the understanding that we'll get some clarification of the examples of non-school organizations.
Yep.
All righty. Well, I think that, that's the last thing on the agenda.
Great.
So I have a motion to adjourn.
I think we already got it.
So.
there we are.
So
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Uh,
Aye. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.